Hi there. I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
At our cousin's wedding, while the string quartet softly played some overplayed Coldplay cover and the servers floated around with flutes of cheap champagne that everyone pretended to enjoy, my sister turned to me with this perfectly symmetrical smile that could cut glass and said, "Don't worry, you'll find someone too, eventually." She said it like she was handing me a compliment dipped in cyanide, her tone sugary sweet, but sharp enough that I felt it scrape across the inside of my ribs. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, reached into my clutch, and handed her a little velvet box I'd been holding onto since that morning. "Hope you like bridesmaid dresses," I said, calm as you like. She opened it right there, and when her eyes scanned the note inside, her jaw quite literally dropped. Like in those dumb movie scenes where the sound cuts and everything slows down. Except this wasn't a movie. This was real life. And for once, I was holding the reins. But before I explain what was in the box, let me tell you about Jessica. See, growing up with a sister like mine is like being a supporting actor in a movie you never auditioned for. Jessica was always the star, the overachiever, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Barbie-perfect embodiment of everything our small-town mother ever wanted in a daughter. She got straight A's. She dated quarterbacks. She went to a university with a name that looked great on sweatshirts. And me, I was the artsy one, the weird one, the one who always came home with paint under her nails and boys who had more tattoos than ambition. I was the one they loved when Jessica wasn't around. I was their backup plan. It wasn't always mean, at least not on the surface. Jessica had this talent for cloaking insults and concern. Like the time I didn't get into my top college and she said, "Maybe it's for the best. You might have felt overwhelmed anyway." Or the time I broke up with my ex and she said, "He never seemed like your forever guy, but don't worry, someone else will love you enough to settle." Settle. That's always how she saw me. Good enough, but not quite. And weddings? Well, those were her Olympics. She thrived in tulle and seating charts. She'd been a bridesmaid in 8 different weddings before 30. I'd been to those weddings too, always solo, always standing a few feet behind her in the photos, always told, "You're next," with that pitying smile from someone who didn't mean it. Jessica lived for moments like that. She basked in the attention, the comparisons, the silent scoreboard she always kept. So when cousin Megan announced her wedding, and Jessica found out I was coming solo, she lit up like it was Christmas morning. What she didn't know, what no one knew, not even my mother, was that I'd stopped being solo about 6 months ago. I didn't plan to keep it a secret, not at first. It just sort of happened. I reconnected with someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who once mattered to Jessica, at least on paper. His name's Daniel. Yes, that Daniel. The one Jessica dated during college and dumped like expired yogurt when she got a summer internship in DC. They were the picture-perfect couple for about 8 months until Jessica got bored. She moved on, he didn't, and neither did I, apparently. Daniel and I ran into each other at a friend's birthday party last winter. It was awkward for all of 30 seconds before it just wasn't. We talked, we drank, we stayed until everyone else left. He remembered things about me, small things like the way I always used to doodle on paper napkins, or how I hated olives with a passion. It was the kind of attention I hadn't felt in years. We started seeing each other casually at first, but it got serious fast. He made me laugh, he listened, and more than anything, he saw me. Not Jessica's little sister, just me. We kept it quiet not because we were hiding, but because it felt too real, too good to risk ruining with premature exposure. So when the wedding came around, I told Daniel to sit this one out. I wasn't ready to blow things up. Or at least, I thought I wasn't. But the moment Jessica leaned in with that saccharine little jab, eventually something in me snapped. Not in an angry, throw-a-drink kind of way. More like finally deciding to stop holding the weight of her words like they meant something. I reached into my clutch, handed her the box, and just said it. "Hope you like bridesmaid dresses." The look on her face, worth every second of restraint I'd practiced for months. She opened it slowly, probably expecting jewelry or some harmless prank, but her expression shifted from smug to stunned in under 3 seconds. Her mouth fell open, the color drained from her face. She stared at the note inside like it had cursed her. It was just a simple card, cream-colored, gold trim, handwritten in my best cursive. All it said was, "Save the date, August 12th. Formal attire, bridesmaid duties expected." She looked up at me, blinking like someone had turned the lights off and back on again. "You're getting married?" she whispered, trying to sound amused but barely holding it together. I smiled back, soft but steady. Eventually came quicker than expected. And with that, I turned and walked toward the dance floor, leaving her standing there like she'd just seen a ghost. Behind me, I could hear our mother's confused voice, asking Jessica what was wrong. Jessica didn't answer. She was still holding the box, and I hadn't even told her the best part yet. Not who I was marrying, not where the wedding would be, not how long I'd been keeping this little secret. But that would come soon enough. If you've ever carried a secret that burned just hot enough to keep you warm, but never enough to leave a mark, then you'll understand what it felt like walking into that wedding reception, knowing what I knew, holding it in like a breath underwater, pretending to be just another unattached guest, sipping on a watered-down cocktail and dodging small talk about dating apps and horoscopes, all while the truth sat folded in my purse like a loaded weapon. It wasn't the kind of secret that felt shameful or scandalous. It was the kind that gave you power, that made every fake smile from someone who'd written you off feel like a challenge you were already winning, and I knew it would change everything the moment I decided to let it out. Daniel and I hadn't meant for it to turn into anything big. At least that's what we told ourselves in the beginning, when we first started texting each other late at night. Conversations that started out light and quickly turned into something heavier, something with roots, something we both knew was tiptoeing into territory that neither of us had dared to explore before. He was older now, not the college kid who used to wait outside the sorority house for Jessica, with his headphones in and a smile that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Back then, I was invisible to him, just the little sister in the background, always hovering just outside the spotlight where Jessica stood, like it was built for her. But time has a funny way of flipping things upside down, and when I saw Daniel again at a birthday dinner for a mutual friend, one of those strange adult get-togethers where no one really wants to be there, but everyone shows up out of obligation, I barely recognized him at first. His hair was shorter, darker, with some early flecks of gray near the temples, and he had this tired sort of smile that made me think he'd seen things, real things, not just the shallow chaos of his early 20s. We started talking over a shared dislike of the music playlist, and ended the night sitting in his car for nearly 2 hours, just talking, just being there in a way that felt weirdly easy. The funny thing is, he didn't bring up Jessica until the 3rd time we met for coffee. And even then, it was in that distant, detached way people talk about an old job or a city they once lived in. Fond, maybe, but far removed. He told me he had been young, too eager to please, too wrapped up in the fantasy of who she was rather than who she actually was. And when she left him for some internship in Washington, he hadn't even been surprised. She had always been chasing the next big thing, and he, in the end, just hadn't been shiny enough to keep her attention. By the time we admitted that we were no longer just talking as friends, it was already something deeper, something that made me nervous and thrilled all at once, because I'd spent years watching Jessica leave wreckage behind without a backward glance, and I didn't want to be just another footnote in one of her forgotten chapters. But Daniel wasn't with me because I was a second chance. He was with me because we made sense in all the ways that mattered, shared sarcasm, long walks in the evenings that neither of us used to enjoy, quiet breakfasts where the silence wasn't awkward but peaceful. We decided to keep it to ourselves, not because we were ashamed, but because we weren't interested in the drama that would come with telling the world, or more accurately, telling Jessica. I knew exactly how she'd react. She'd laugh first, that dismissive kind of laugh she used to hide behind when things didn't go her way. and then she'd start picking it apart, calling it inappropriate or weird or whatever label would help her make sense of the fact that someone she discarded had found something real with someone she never thought of as competition. And yet, the wedding changed everything. I hadn't planned to say anything that day. I had rehearsed a dozen versions of small talk, of playing nice, of letting her think she still had the upper hand. But the moment she leaned in with that smug little smile and said, "Eventually," something in me refused to stay quiet any longer. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even spite. It was clarity. I handed her the box like it weighed nothing, but the truth inside it landed like a brick. After that, I knew I couldn't keep Daniel in the shadows anymore. During the reception, while people danced badly to nostalgic pop hits and laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, I slipped away from the main room and found him waiting outside by the garden terrace, his tie loose, 2 buttons undone, looking at me like I was the only thing keeping him grounded in that moment. "We doing this?" he asked, voice low, as if even saying the words would shake the walls. I nodded, and we walked back inside, side by side, not making a show of it, but not hiding either. Jessica saw us before we got 10 feet in. She was by the bar, glass of wine in hand, mid-laugh with one of our cousins, when her eyes caught mine, then Daniel's, and then back to mine again. The shift in her expression was almost imperceptible, almost, but I saw it. The corners of her mouth twitched. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. She turned back to the cousin, still smiling, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. We didn't stop to talk to her, not yet. I wasn't ready to hand her all the puzzle pieces. I wanted her to sit with the uncertainty, to feel the silence where answers should have been, to stew in the possibility of it all without confirmation. We made our way to a small table in the back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't shrinking to make someone else comfortable. I was just there, with him. And if Jessica wanted answers, she was going to have to come get them herself. She would, just not tonight. And when she did, she'd learn that this wasn't just about a relationship. It was about every time she pushed me down to lift herself up. And now I was finally standing. If there's one thing I've learned from growing up in a family where silence often carried more weight than the words ever could, it's that confrontation doesn't always start with raised voices or shattered glasses. In fact, sometimes the most explosive moments are those wrapped in hushed tones, in glances that last a beat too long, in the kind of calm that hums with a tension everyone pretends not to hear. And that's exactly the kind of storm that had started to brew after Jessica read the note in that box and realized that whatever picture-perfect narrative she had constructed for herself was slowly slipping through her fingers. She didn't react right away, not publicly at least. No tantrums, no outbursts, but in the way her posture stiffened and her gaze hardened, I could tell that her mind was racing to catch up to a truth she had never even imagined she'd need to prepare for. The thing about Jessica is that she thrives in control, not just of herself, but of the room, the people, the entire atmosphere. She's the kind of person who doesn't simply enter a space. She dominates it, curating every word, every laugh, every impression with the precision of someone who has spent their entire life calculating what each step will buy her. And I had let her. For years, I'd let her paint me as the flaky one, the one who couldn't quite hold things together, the one who didn't follow through, because that narrative served a purpose for the rest of the family. It kept the balance. It gave her the stage and me the back seat. But as I sat beside Daniel that evening, his hand resting quietly on my knee beneath the linen-covered table, I felt something shift in the foundation that had always kept us in those roles, like the ground beneath us had finally started to crack just enough for me to slip out of the mold she'd cast for me. It wasn't until well after dinner, when the candles had burned low and half the guests had retreated to the dance floor or their hotel rooms, that she approached me, heels clicking too precisely, smile too tight, that polished charm she'd perfected over 3 decades flickering under the weight of what she clearly didn't understand. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice sweet but strained, like someone trying to hold a glass together with bare hands. I nodded, rising slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of every second that passed between her demand and my compliance. We stepped out into the courtyard, where string lights swayed gently in the warm breeze, and laughter floated from the open reception hall behind us, distant and muffled, like background noise to a scene that had been building for years. She didn't waste time. "What is this?" she asked, holding up the note like it was some kind of joke or mistake, her voice already rising with disbelief masked as amusement. "Is this real? Are you seriously marrying someone? And I'm just finding out about it. Now?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small beneath that gaze. "Yes, Jessica, I am. And yes, it's real." I paused, letting that land. "I wanted you to hear it this way. I needed you to see what it looks like when I stopped letting you control the narrative." She blinked, once, slowly, like her brain was trying to reboot. "Control? What are you even talking about?" "Rachel, I've always tried to help you. I've always looked out for you." I laughed, not cruelly, but the kind of laugh that slips out when someone tries to rewrite history in front of your face. "Jessica, you've always looked down on me. There's a difference. You never helped me. You managed me. You made sure I never stepped too far out of the shadow because that's where you felt safe. But that's over now." She crossed her arms, shoulders stiffening in that defensive pose she always took when things started slipping out of her grasp. "So who is it? Who's the guy? This mystery fiancé you just magically forgot to mention for how long?" And there it was, the moment I'd rehearsed in my head a dozen times but had never quite figured out how it would land in real life. I didn't flinch. "Daniel?" Her face didn't change immediately. It was like she didn't register the name at first. Like it took a second for her brain to sort through the files. But when it clicked, the color drained from her cheeks, and her jaw dropped. Not in confusion this time, but in something dangerously close to disbelief, and something uglier underneath. "Daniel?" she whispered, as if saying it louder would somehow change the answer. "As in, my Daniel?" I shrugged, calm but deliberate. "He was never really yours, Jessica. You left him behind the same way you leave everything behind that stops serving your image. But he didn't break the way you thought he would. And neither did I." "You can't be serious," she said, her voice cracking just enough to betray the veneer. "You've been dating him? For how long? You kept this from everyone?" I nodded slowly. 6 months. And yes, I kept it quiet. Not because I was afraid of your opinion, but because I didn't owe you my truth until I was ready. And now, I am. She took a step back, visibly rattled now, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find a response that would put her back in control. But there wasn't one. She had no playbook for this scenario, no way to twist it without sounding like exactly what she was. A woman who thought she owned the past, only to discover that the future had already left her behind. "I don't even know what to say," she muttered, half to herself, shaking her head as if the whole thing were some cruel joke. "This is insane." "No," I said, stepping closer now, my voice steady, final. "What's insane is that it took me this long to stop letting you define who I'm allowed to be happy with." And just before she turned to leave, clearly unwilling to let herself unravel in full view of the glowing lights and half-empty wine glasses, I added one more thing, the final crack in the dam. "You should have read the rest of the note." She paused, turning back slightly, just enough for me to see her eyes narrow with suspicion. I reached into my purse, pulled out a second piece of folded paper, the continuation of the invitation, and held it out. She took it slowly, like it might bite her, and when she unfolded it, her face changed again. But what it said? That part's not for her to know all at once. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, patient, layered like a story she never bothered to read past the first page. And Jessica? She was about to discover that I'd written the ending myself. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in the space between two people who've just crossed a line they can't uncross. A dense, weighty kind of quiet that wraps itself around your chest and makes the air feel heavier, like walking through fog that knows all your secrets. And as Jessica stood there in the middle of the courtyard, with that second note trembling slightly between her manicured fingers, her expression caught somewhere between confusion, disbelief, and the kind of dawning realization that doesn't just sting but scalds. I knew the silence wasn't just about what had been revealed, but about everything she hadn't yet pieced together. She didn't speak at first, and I didn't rush her. I just waited, letting her read each word slowly, deliberately, her eyes narrowing with every sentence, as if the ink itself was rewriting the version of the world she had spent her entire life constructing. The second note wasn't flashy. No dramatic fonts or glittering embellishments, just a simple, elegant print with clean lines and direct language. Formal dress fitting, bridesmaids only, location, Oak & Lace Boutique, Tuesday at 5, wedding party photo shoot to follow. Kindly confirm your size. It was the kind of invitation Jessica would usually take for granted, one she'd receive with glee because, up until now, she'd always been at the center of these events, always the one being celebrated, admired, documented in soft-focus candids and filtered Instagram reels. But this time, she wasn't the bride, wasn't even the maid of honor, and the implications settled into her bones like ice water. She blinked slowly, looked up at me, and for a moment I thought she might laugh, might attempt to reclaim her usual smug composure, with a joke about how bridesmaids weren't her color, or how she didn't do off-the-rack dresses. But the laugh never came. Instead, she studied me, eyes narrowed like she was seeing something unfamiliar in someone she thought she'd known. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, not yet soft, but stripped of its usual edge. "You're serious." I nodded, calm and steady, the way you are when you've rehearsed a moment so many times in your mind that it becomes muscle memory. "Dead serious, and before you ask, yes, I want you there, in the dress, standing next to me, because this isn't just about a wedding, Jess. This is about family, about showing up, about being part of something even when it's not about you." Her jaw clenched, and she looked away briefly, scanning the darkened courtyard like she was searching for some kind of escape hatch. "You didn't even tell Mom," she said after a long pause, a note of accusation slipping back into her tone. "She knows now," I replied, watching the way that small admission landed with a thud. "I told her a few days ago. She was surprised, yes, but not upset. She wants to be involved. She's happy for me." Jessica scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "She's happy for you because she doesn't know the whole story. You're marrying my ex, Rachel. That's not just some quirky twist. It's weird. It's invasive. It's desperate." And there it was, the real Jessica, emerging from beneath the cracks of polished diplomacy, her carefully contained disdain finally seeping through now that the shock was starting to wear off. I didn't flinch. I'd braced for this. I'd expected her to lash out, to say something that reminded me of every year I spent wondering why she always seemed to get away with being cruel as long as she did it with a smile. "You're right," I said, not because I believed her accusation, but because I understood where it came from. "It is unexpected, but you don't get to decide what's right for me. You left Daniel, you discarded him like he was a phase, and I paused, letting the words breathe. "I saw him, I saw what you never did, or maybe what you didn't care to hold on to." For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at the note again, her fingers tightening slightly around its edges like she was resisting the urge to tear it in half, as if the destruction of the message could somehow erase the truth behind it. Then, with a sharp inhale and a flick of her wrist, she handed it back to me. "You really want me in this wedding?" she asked, her voice icy but steady now, like she was shifting gears into damage control mode. "Fine, I'll be there. I'll smile. I'll wear whatever ridiculous dress you put me in. But don't expect me to pretend this is normal." "I don't need you to pretend it's normal," I said, taking the note and slipping it back into my purse. "I just need you to be there, for once. And that apparently was all she could tolerate for the night. She turned on her heel, her hair whipping slightly as she stormed back into the reception, leaving me standing beneath the swaying lights and listening to the distant sound of someone belting out an off-key rendition of an 80s ballad inside. But the real shock came 2 days later, when Jessica actually showed up to the boutique. She arrived 5 minutes late, of course, dressed in designer sunglasses and an outfit that screamed reluctant compliance. But she showed up, and as the boutique assistant handed her a pale sage green gown to try on, something tasteful, simple, nothing that would ever be mistaken for the star of the show, I watched her hesitate before taking it, her fingers brushing the fabric like she wasn't sure if this was a dream she could wake up from or a punishment she hadn't seen coming. She tried the dress on in silence, emerging from the changing room with that same stiff smile she wore when people she didn't respect tried to compliment her. I told her she looked lovely, and she raised an eyebrow like she was trying to determine whether I meant it. I did. I wanted her there. Not for revenge, not for validation, but because after everything, she was still my sister. Complicated, selfish, sharp-edged, but mine. And in some strange way, having her beside me at that altar, standing there in the dress she never expected to wear, for a wedding she never thought would happen, felt like closure. But just when I thought we were done rewriting the script, just when I thought maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner, I let slip a detail I hadn't meant to. As she was taking off the dress, I said it without thinking. It's crazy how fast everything moved once Daniel and I got back from Italy. She froze, one heel off, her expression flickering. Italy? And in that split second, I realized what I'd just done. I'd let her read the next page too soon, because she didn't know what happened in Italy. Not yet. And that was the real story. Some people believe that the truth always comes out in the end, that no matter how deeply you bury it, or how carefully you curate the image you present to the world, eventually the seams split, and the raw, unfiltered reality bleeds through like wine through linen. But what those people never tell you, what they never seem to understand, is that sometimes the most powerful truths aren't shouted across rooms or revealed in tearful monologues beneath chandeliers, but are instead slipped quietly into conversations like hidden blades, so subtle you don't even feel the wound until the bleeding begins. That was what I had done with that one offhand comment about Italy, a single word dropped into the dressing room air like an afterthought. And the moment it passed my lips, I saw the recognition flicker across Jessica's face, sharp and immediate, because she may not have known the specifics, but she knew enough to sense there was something important she hadn't been told. She didn't press me right then, not in the boutique, not in front of the stylist who was busy fussing over hem lengths and fabric weights, but her silence said more than a question ever could. And when she left, she didn't hug me, didn't wave, didn't even bother with the usual half smile she saved for family obligations. She simply muttered something about confirming her dress size later and walked out like the ground beneath her had started to shift, and she couldn't figure out whether to run from it or dig her heels in. The truth, the full, unedited, unprettified truth, was that Daniel and I hadn't just gotten serious over the last few months, and we weren't planning a wedding in August because we were rushing to catch up with everyone else's timelines. The reality was we were already married. It had happened in Italy during a trip that was supposed to be nothing more than a spontaneous escape from the chaos of everything we'd left behind. It wasn't a big ceremony, just the two of us, a local officiant, and the soft sound of the sea in the background. But it was real, and it was perfect in a way that nothing in my life had ever been. We didn't tell anyone, not even our closest friends, because we wanted something that belonged only to us, untouched by opinions, free from the weight of family dynamics and past baggage. We wanted our beginning to be ours, and so we kept it tucked away, knowing that one day we'd bring it into the light, on our terms. The celebration in August wasn't a wedding, it was a reveal, a vow renewal disguised as a ceremony, so that everyone who had underestimated us, who had looked at me and seen someone unremarkable, could finally see what I had built for myself, not out of spite, but out of the kind of love that grows quietly, fiercely, and without apology. It was also, if I'm being honest, a bit of theater. Because while I didn't need revenge, not in the traditional sense, I also wasn't above letting Jessica stew in the delicious uncertainty of not knowing everything. For once in my life, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't in any rush to give it up. The August evening arrived hot and thick with humidity, the kind of weather that clings to your skin and forces everything to move just a little slower. Our family arrived in waves, dressed to the nines, making polite conversation and fanning themselves with programs they hadn't yet read. The venue, a private estate on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields and old oak trees, was decorated simply but elegantly, with soft white flowers and lanterns that would glow later as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jessica arrived late, naturally, wearing the bridesmaid dress I'd chosen for her. Sage green, understated, classic. And though her makeup was flawless and her posture perfect, I could tell from the way she looked at me that her mind was a storm of questions. As the ceremony began, Daniel and I stood together beneath a wooden arch wrapped in ivy and lights, and I could feel the electricity of every gaze on us, some surprised, others skeptical, a few genuinely moved. When the officiant began to speak, not with a traditional wedding script, but with a personal acknowledgement of our already exchanged vows, it took a few beats before the realization swept across the audience. Murmurs began, hushed whispers passing from row to row, and I caught the exact moment Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to horror, her eyes narrowing as she processed that she hadn't just been kept in the dark. She'd been played. Afterward, as champagne flowed and laughter filled the air like background music to our long-awaited unveiling, she pulled me aside, her voice low and taut with a fury she barely concealed. "You were already married," she hissed, each word clipped like spitting it out hurt. "You let me stand up there like some clueless extra in a scene you'd already written." I didn't flinch. "I did," I said, simply, honestly. "Because you needed to see what it looked like when something didn't revolve around you. You needed to stand next to someone else's joy and not make it yours." Her eyes welled, though whether it was anger, regret, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. "You did all this just to get back at me." "No," I said, and I meant it. "I did this because I was done being the footnote in your story. I wanted my own, and I found someone who wanted to write it with me." She didn't respond. She just looked at me for a long time, then walked away into the crowd, her figure eventually swallowed up by the dance floor and flickering lights. Later, as Daniel and I stood on the veranda, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, he asked me if I thought she'd ever understand. I took a long sip of wine, letting the questions settle before answering. Maybe, or maybe she won't, but either way, I'm finally okay with not needing her to. And as the music drifted into something slower and softer, and the people we loved swayed gently under the glow of paper lanterns, I let the silence speak for itself. Not the silence of fear or submission, but the peace that comes from finally telling your story on your own terms. Because sometimes, the best endings aren't about triumph or revenge. Sometimes, they're just about walking away with your head held high, knowing that, in the end, the person who tried to define you never really knew you at all.